I went 4 times to the White House, and we're sitting at the table and we're having all these discussions, and the moderator says, well, Sergeant Adams, we want to hear from you. I said, I'm here as Sergeant Adams, but Carol Adams is the human being here. And so until you know the story of Carol Adams, then will you understand Sergeant Adams? I said, my father murdered my mother when I was 17 years old. I called for the police during all of those years, and I did everything that I was supposed to. I said, but my mother still lost her life.
Welcome to Reaching Out. I'm your host, Zack Carter. Please join me as I speak with a diverse group of people to find out their thoughts on religion, politics, and culture. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Reaching Out. We have a special guest, Sergeant Carol Adams, here with us, and I'm very excited to speak with her. Real quick, Sergeant Adams, could you briefly tell us about yourself, what you do, who you are?
Well, I'm a sergeant with the Richmond City Police Department, and I've been working in public safety for about 28 years now, because I worked for the Sheriff's Department before I became an actual city police officer. And I'm a mom of 4 with my oldest daughter by marriage, and I have 6 grandchildren. And being Granny Carol is the most important role that I play, even though I love being Sergeant Adams and being out connecting with the community, but being with my babies, that's my number one priority.
That's it.
Yes.
That's it. How old are they? What are the ages?
The oldest grandchild will be 16 tomorrow, so we're working on that party.
Yeah.
And then I have a 10-year-old, and then I have 3 7-year-olds and a 2-year-old.
Wow, okay.
And so it's a range, and so just hearing those words, Granny Carol, that just pierces my heart.
Yeah, that's it. That's
Yes.
what does it for you. You
Yes.
know, I've talked to a ton of people who, they're like, yeah, parenting was fun, but like grandparenting is what it's about.
That's the bonus. But you can't get to grandparenting until you do the kids.
That's why you have kids, is so you can become a grandparent. So that, you can have all the fun and then send them home, after you fed them treats and took them on roller coasters.
Yes. Yeah. Put candy in their pockets. I send them home with the pockets full of
candy and money.
She's like, Mom, we have to go to the dentist. And sometimes when they come over, they'll look, and they all have their own cabinet with their snacks in it, and when they look at the snacks, the parents, they know. I'm like, well, when you're in my house, Granny is the boss. Always. I'm the boss over everybody.
That's amazing. That's so good. That's so good. Well, I know, so we met when the Life Church did a service project with a family that were victims, they were survivors of domestic violence. If you could you tell the audience a little bit about this family, why we were helping them, how you got involved helping this family?
Okay. Well, along with my role as being a city police officer, I am the founder of the Carol Adams Foundation, and the foundation helps survivors of domestic violence, women, men, and children who've been impacted. And my goal is to be that catalyst and to be a gap service provider with the foundation, because we have a lot of organizations that provide generic and basic services, but there are times when families need specific services, and they need to be able to receive those services right away without a lot of going through a chain of command, because red tape can get people killed. And by working in the system, I realized that. And so the organization was created based upon my life story.
Okay.
I remember as a child growing up, I lived in a household of domestic violence for 12 years, to where my father actually took the life of my mother.
Oh my gosh.
And so at age 17, I was an orphan. My dad went to jail, and then my mom was gone off to heaven. And so I was left to run my household, and I've been running my household and taking care of me and my sister and my family for, it would be 37 years this year. Wow. And so my heart, I'm directly connected to anyone who's been impacted by domestic violence. And this particular family, I met this mom at a speaking engagement, and as we sat around the table and we shared, and after I spoke, she spoke. And while I was leaving, she approached me and she said she wanted to talk to me about her daughter. So I just assumed that her daughter which was a teenager, was in a relationship that mom just didn't think was really good. But I noticed that this mom had sunshades on, and this was in the middle of winter, and this was at 7 o'clock at night, and we were at the meeting. So, it sort of like drew my attention to her because she had the sunshades on, but never really thought, maybe why. And so after we talked for a while, she shared with me that her husband had shot her in her left temple, and while she was holding her 18-month-old child and in front of her 10-year-old child, who was now about 11 or 12. And that was her concern, because when I share my story, I share as a child. I talk about the difficulty of living in a household, sort of like a hostage. I explained that because when kids live in this household, they don't have the freedom or the autonomy to just say, okay, I don't want to live here anymore, and to just leave. And so me and this mom became connected, and mom had 3 children. And the 10-year-old actually saved her life, because after witnessing her dad shoot her mom, she still had the strength enough to dial 911 and to tell them what happened, and then also to be there to care for her mother. So actually she saved her mom's life.
Wow.
And so after spending time with this family, I, like I said, immediately I was attached to them, but getting to know those girls and getting to know mom. And when I had a gentleman, a nice, kind gentleman, one day he met a friend of mine, and he had a house that he was going to put on the market to sell or to give to a church. And so my friend said, well, why don't you consider giving it to my friend, Carol Adams, who has this organization, and this is what she does. And so the gentleman asked to meet me, and we met over at the house. And he donated the house to my organization. Wow. And, you know, so my friend John had told me about this gentleman months in advance, but you know how people say a lot of things. So I said, okay, you know, because I'm always nice, kind, and polite. But then to get there and for him to actually say that he was going to give me that house, I mean, just give it to me. Yeah. I'm like, you know, and I'm hugging him and I'm holding him, and you know, he's like, okay, man. But still, he's being polite, and I'm just, you know, God, is this for real? And so once he gave me the house, and I always wanted to have houses for women or families that have been impacted to be able to live in while they're going through a transitional phase. You know, because when you've been impacted and you just are uprooted and you have nothing and you're just trying, how do you recover from that? How do you recover from being shot? She was a nursing student, so you've been shot in your left temple. And so you're always going to be sort of like disabled. And you have your 3 children who witnessed this. So everybody's been impacted, not just and not just from this incident, but we have to measure everything up to that point, because it actually stopped at that point, but with such horrific damage that's left behind. And so once we, my team, we, you know, got the house ready and was working on it. And so I decided that I wanted her and her babies to live there. So when I'm working with families, I never assume that I know what they need, what they have, or what they don't have. So I called her one day after spending time with the children, because they would tell me little bits and pieces, but, you know, so I could assume that they had, for sure they had some things, but not a lot of things. So I never, ever, like I said, try to judge or to say, well, here I have this, this, and this, assuming that they have nothing. So I called her and I asked her about her place where she was living. And she said, well, I'm getting ready to move because I'm looking for an apartment now. And so I have to find somewhere to move to. And I already knew that they still had all of the same furniture that they had when the shooting occurred. And they basically lived in the same apartment complex that the shooting occurred. So they had not ever been detached from that night. You know, so they everything was still was still there, and they were just managing day to day through it. And so I told her that I had a house and that she could live in it if she wanted to. And so I gave her the address, and I said, well, go by and look at it, take the girls, and you all decide. And so they went by and they looked at it, and they called me, and everybody was excited, and I was excited too. So then we asked for all of their favorite colors, because we wanted to decorate the house specifically for them. And I told them I didn't want them to bring any furniture. I just wanted them to bring clothes. I wanted them to have a brand new beginning. Just fresh start. Just fresh start. And so they, we worked on the house, and we did a ribbon cutting ceremony, and they went in the house. And then it was a couple of months later when you all came to put the deck on it, because it didn't have a back porch. And for me, and you saw we had put up the fence, and you all would have work on the fence. And so it's really, really important to provide an environment of safety and serenity when you've experienced something like that, and the opportunity for the kids to be free and to go out in the backyard and play, or mom to just be able to sit on the front porch or to sit on the back porch. and everybody to have things in the house that was, bought specifically for them. And they get to live in this house at no cost for rental, but they have to pay like the water bills to manage that part of it. But and for Mom, she was completely disabled. She was not working, and she was depressed a lot. So, Mr. Irving helped to get her a job at DMV. And so that was her first employment after the event. And then after that, she's also gone on to become fully employed with an organization. And the oldest daughter, who was 10 years old when it happened, she's actually graduated from high school and she's been accepted into college.
Yeah.
And that's truly, truly powerful. And and that's how I came to know the Life Church, because Vernon and I talked about it, and we shared, I shared with him, and he got to meet the girls and Mom. And we, they're just adorable, which, and to be able to fall in love with them, and just to be able to help them have basic everyday things without Mom having to stress, because she has to stress with her disability of having seizures and stuff like that. So that's really the way that we met, and that's in meeting that family. And for me, with my organization, I want to not just be there for the moment, but to be there for the lifetime. Because when families go through trauma, they need constant support. They need to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody that they can trust to help them make decisions. And to help guide them, and to help them maneuver and navigate through the different systems. Because some of the systems, most of the systems were designed and created back in the early 60s, and we're still trying to operate in those same systems.
It's just outdated.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. How many families is your foundation helping?
Well, so we have 2 families that are living in spaces, and then we had 25 children that we put through summer camp this year and last year, and all of those families have been impacted by domestic violence, and some of the students children have actually lost their parents. So I'll say a total of about 10 to 15 families that would add up to be about 25 kids.
That's amazing. Is this something you want to, you want to continue doing, for the rest of your life? Like, this is like,
absolutely.
I
have 4 years to go to retire from the police department.
So like, once that's done, it's like
right. And I'm preparing
now,
and the goal is that even though we're helping those families, that there are, we're connected to the hotline. So the things that the organizations that work through the hotline can't do, we do, because they don't provide transportation. So unless you're in immediate danger, they don't provide housing unless you're in immediate danger. So let's say you fled your home and you are calling them for help. So you're no longer in danger. So their guidelines won't allow them to help you. So they would call me and say, well, can you put this person up in a hotel, or can you give this person transportation? And that's the goal for me and the organization, to be able to provide those services, immediate services, and to be able to make an immediate decision, and not to have to go through a lot of red tape as to, we have to wait for 4 different people to say it's okay for me to give you money to put on the bus, where actually you might have changed your mind by the time the decision is made, when we really need you to be able to make a good, sound decision, understanding right now that this is not a safe place for you and your children to be.
Absolutely. Last question on this, and then we'll be switching topics. But what would you want people who have never been affected by domestic violence to know about it, and why is this a cause people should invest their time and money into?
Okay. Well, people who have not, let's say everybody's been impacted to some degree. It may not be immediate impact, but they know someone who has been impacted, and that domestic violence is very real and very serious. And we lose the concept that domestic violence occurred with the very first family, with Cain and Abel. That was the first homicide that ever occurred in human existence, and it was domestic because it was brother versus brother. So that we are all susceptible to that, because that's where our root come from, and that is, you should not be ashamed of being impacted by domestic violence, but you should become knowledgeable. And that's what I want people to understand. Do your research, learn and understand what the characteristics are, because we miss the boat when it comes to like bullying. Bullying is at the core of domestic violence. When a little person grows up with those tendencies, we have to correct that behavior, because if those are your tendencies when you become older in a relationship and when you can't have your way, then those same tendencies, power and control. And that's what we need to understand. And the power and control does not just exist over physically, but it could be verbally, it could be financial. So all of these things come into play. And I want people to educate their children and to talk about domestic violence at a very young age so that they will know what domestic violence and sexual assault is, because we raise our children in protected environments, and then we raise them and we send them out to this wicked world. And so, and especially on college campuses, it is just so much happening that's not talked about. And then our children can't go home and talk about it because the conversation was never brought up at home. So then they seek help from their peers who has the same limited information that they have. So it's important to become knowledgeable about it and to have those conversations about it. And if you look up the statistics, domestic violence is prevalent between the ages of, let's say, 17 to 24 years old, and that's the prime age of our birthing years for young women. And so if we look at this age group, and these are the age group that are having our children, and this is the age group that's being impacted. Think about the children that are being born into these environments. And that's really, really key and critical, because if our children are born into these environments, then they may tend to think that this is accepted behavior because this is the way that things have been in my household. And so we need to talk about it. We need to talk out loud about it. I don't know if you remember Jerry Kilgore. He was the Attorney General years ago. And I used to do a lot of work with him, and that's what he used to say. You know, everybody needs to be talking. It needs to be a kitchen, a dining room table conversation about domestic violence and sex assault. What's friendly touching, what's friendly verbiage, you know, what's good, what's not good, and what's acceptable. You know, and what's acceptable depends on where you come from, because and what's been said around you, what's been the practice in your household. You know, so those are things that I would encourage people to research. And if you know somebody in a domestic relationship, people have the tendency to become just like the perpetrator. They want to tell that person what to do. That person needs to be the autonomy to make their own decisions, but you're there to listen to them and to be that lifeline. And so you have to become knowledgeable so that you can share with them and you can help them create a plan to remove themselves from that particular relationship. But that person has to do it on their own. But you can't start to dictate, because then you're just like the batterer, and then you're actually pushing that person back into the arms of the perpetrator, because that perpetrator is feeding them that information, like they don't care about you, this, that, and the other. And so you have to sort of like play devil's advocate. And you say, even though you want to say, you know, hey, you should move, you should ask that person, so tell me, how can I help you? And what can I do to assist you in this situation? Versus telling them what you think they should do.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right, because I lived in the same household with my mother, and I tried to tell her to leave. And if I couldn't convince her to leave, and I was her child living under those circumstances with her, I know for sure that that person has to make the decision on their own. And people also need to understand is that when somebody decide to leave, their life becomes 500% more at risk, because they're leaving that perpetrator. So when we talk about leaving, it has to be a very carefully planned event, so that everybody involved can remain safe. And that includes the police officers that may have to respond out on a call to intervene.
Okay, so we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna switch gears a little bit. I kind of want to talk about you working for the police department.
Okay.
Why did you decide to become a police officer?
God played a trick on me.
God played a trick on you. He does that sometimes.
Yes, he does. And so, growing up, I used to call for the police to come so much as a kid. And back in the late 70s and early 80s, there were no laws about domestic violence to say what the police shall or shall not do. So they would come and they would pat my dad on the back and say, well, Mr. Adams, you go and you cool down, you calm down, because they just didn't arrest, because that was a family problem. And so over the course of the years of calling them, and then when my mom was murdered, you know, I remember the police officers that came to my house that night, My mother was partially nude. I remember them in the room. They weren't laughing at the situation, but they were not, this was significant for me. And the thing is that I later came to work with those same people, and they don't remember me, but I remember them. So when I say God played a trick on me, the system did not work for us. It worked against us. My dad was afforded the opportunity to a plea bargain, and the plea bargain was 7 years with 5 years suspended, so he only served 18 months. So I was pissed.
For the murder?
For the murder, yes. Because there had been no history of domestic abuse, because the police did not arrest. They didn't write any reports. So nothing would. So when we talk about voiceless, being the voice of a victim, when a person's not here anymore, they don't have a voice. It's only a one-sided conversation. And so most of the time when perpetrators, they know that. So when the police respond, they become the victim. They blame everything else on the batterer, on the victim. The batterer becomes the victim. So it's reverse psychology, so that you will feel sorry for him. She didn't clean the house, she didn't do this, she went out, she spent the money, and it could be he, because we do have some female perpetrators also. So when it was time for sentencing, my mom didn't have a voice, even though she was shot 5 times. The police did not ask us about the history, about how many times the police had come. They didn't ask me if he had ever threatened to kill her, which he openly and publicly would do when he was in his violent outrage, drunken outrages. He would say, "Bitch, I'm gonna kill you." So when that night when I came home and I sat on the bed to take my shoes off, and in the next room I heard those shots, pow, 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 pow. I didn't even have to look. I knew he had kept his promise. And so I went to the phone and I dialed 911 for the police to come. And so he was sentenced. He served his 18 months and he came home. And so, no, I didn't care for the police. And 17 years later, God made me become a police officer. And I tell you, my journey there was, I should not be. You see I'm on the 5'5" and I weigh 99 pounds, right? First of all, I first started with the sheriff.
I still wouldn't mess with you.
That's good, okay? But when I went to work at the sheriff's department, they had a height and weight requirement, and I didn't match any of that. The doctor there said, "Well, Carol, you seem like you have a pretty good personality and everything else checks out. It's like you get on the scale." And I went to take my coat off. He said, "No, I want you to keep everything on."
We're gonna give you this 5-pound weight.
Yes,
here's some
we're
weights.
gonna check this off, and you go at it. And so that was with the sheriff's department. And so then I worked there for the 7.5 years, and so they had an announcement, police announcement, and I was like, you know what, let me try this. It's a $5,000 pay raise. I can do this for my, and I have 3 kids, so this will be great. Yeah. And so I go to take the test, and you have to go visit your own physician before you take the physical agility test, because the police department wants to make sure that your doctor says that you're in good enough condition health-wise to be able to run the 1.5 miles, to do the push-ups, the jumping and all of that stuff. And so I went to my doctor to get, him to sign off on me being able to do it. So the morning of my test, the nurse calls me like at 8 o'clock in the morning, and she's starting off with small talk. She's like, "Oh, I'm a grown woman. I'm 33 years old, so you're not just calling me for small talk. Tell me what's wrong." All right. So she says, "Well, doctor wants you to go to take the test this morning, Carol, because he says your iron level is at 6. It should be at 14 or 15. And so he said, "Well, come in and we'll give you some iron pills, and you eat a lot of liver. And the next time they give the test, then we would have boosted you up enough so that you can take the test." But he had already signed the paperwork, right? So I said, "Well, okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am." And so my grandmother always told me that if you do nothing, nothing will happen. But if you try, there's always a possibility. Yeah. So I got dressed and I drove over to the police academy. And when I get there, you got all these little kids, like 21, 22, 23 years old. And I'm 33 years old. Yeah. So when I see them, I'm like, well, maybe not. Maybe I'll drive off. But my car wouldn't go. My car would not go. So it's like, well, okay, all right. So I get out and I go in, and it's about 200 people. Yeah. And so we run, we jump, and we do everything. And so after we finish running, so I found myself this little corner, and I'm sitting over in the corner, winded as all, about to pass out, but I'm tough because I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, I don't have to move. I don't have to move. And so, and lo and behold, I got the job.
My goodness.
And, right. And so you talk about purpose, and that's what I related to purpose. And we all have purpose-driven lives. That's bottom line. But if not for, and this is 17 years later, if not for the Lord putting me out there to go and respond on those calls for service where there were moms and children and dads just like my family, and to get there and to see the babies standing in the corner. And so my first instinct is to talk to the child, is to comfort the child, because that wasn't done for me and for us. Nobody asked us any questions. But then I could look at mom and dad and say, you know, it's quite all right if you two want to stay in a relationship and you want to be Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. But when you bring children into this world, when you create a life, your responsibility and dedication is first to that life. And you don't want your children exposed to secondhand smoke. You don't want them exposed to drugs. But here you have them in this volatile household where it's supposed to be the safest place for them. And they're not strangers or people from the outside that's creating this craziness. It's you, the parents. It's like my parents, they had no idea who I was, what I liked, what I didn't like. They just knew I was their little girl that smiled all the time. I didn't act out in school. My sister did. She used to get into fights all of the time. So I was this little kid that just went under the radar. Nobody knew what I was feeling, whether it was good or bad or anything like that. And so I could have those conversations with those parents and to tell them, and I would share my story with them. And they would look at me because I'm in a police uniform. It's like, well, it's like, I'm human. I am a human being. Policing is my profession, and I've had this life experience. And I'm not telling you because of my training from the police department. I'm telling you from the training in my life that this is not fair to those children. And that you both have to make some decisions. And I can tell you that children would prefer to live in a household with their parents, one here and one somewhere else, and to be happy versus to come home and to have to run for the border or run to a locked door where you can't get to the other side and to see if your parent is okay. Or you have to run outside and run next door for them to call for the police. And that's just not fair. And so after doing that, so many times, you know, and I went to a domestic violence training, and it was there where, you know, God did this like exorcist thing with me. There was a police officer actually in the class, and it was social workers, police, Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and nurses. And one officer actually said that, well, you know, sometimes women ask to get beat, you know, and it was like,
wow. Wow.
And I was like, well, I just want one question I have for you is that when was the last time you heard your mother ask somebody to beat her? This is your mother. This is what I want. And I'm saying God might bless you with a daughter one day, and you might possibly have a sister, but I want you to consider what you just said. It's like, and the only way to earth is by way of woman. So the woman that gave you life, you need to go home and to ask her if she's ever desired for somebody to physically beat her. And ever since that day, I've been talking. I can't keep quiet. And when I say God played this trick on me, but he sent me back to the core of the police department to teach them how to treat people on the other side of the tape, first of all, because I always go back to my house that night. And always, even when it came down to telling us what happened, you know, I remember standing in the ER hallway and looking at the doctor and the police deciding who's going to come tell us that my mom didn't make it. Somebody's got to come. Somebody. And we're two kids. And the police never came back to check on us until it was the defense attorney is the only person from the system actually came to check on us besides serving a subpoena to go to court. And I refused to go to court. I'm rebellious. Most people don't know, but I am on the other side. But God put me in the middle to be an advocate, for the voiceless and to be an advocate for the children, because, you know, they're so often overlooked. And people don't realize is that when you grow up in an environment like that, you have these triggers and you don't even know why you have these triggers. Because you can't articulate it, because all of it, like, I don't like fussing and screaming. As a police officer, I don't yell and scream at anybody. And if I come to your house and you're yelling and screaming, I'm going to stand there and wait until you calm down, until you can talk to me, because that's at the core of me. Fussing, yelling, and screaming, that gets to my nerves. And so I don't argue, I don't fuss. My my oldest daughter, she's always on me. Everything can't be peaches and cream, Mom. I was like, you got to stand up to people. It's like, I have my way of standing up to people, and I don't argue. I walk away, because it takes two. And so, and those are things that have just impacted me throughout my life. And so, with God playing this trick on me, but this was the catalyst for my purpose. This is the platform for my purpose, because I'm out there and I'm talking to people, and I get to go into doors, into places where other people can't go, an average citizen. And I get to sit at a table, and people get to listen to me, not just because of my police uniform, but because of my experience. And I don't know if I told you what I went to the Department of Justice and went to the White House, and they asked me to share my story there.
At the White House? At
the White House.
Under which presidency?
President Obama.
Okay.
I went 4 times to the White House. And the first time I went to the Department of Justice, and they have all of these chiefs from all over the country there, and they have Ron Davis, he's in charge of, Department of Justice and, law enforcement. And so they're having this conversation about domestic violence. First, I'm baffled because this is the first time they've convened a meeting to talk about domestic violence, to a uniform process as to all police departments should follow this process, when we're investigating. In 2015, 2016, that's crazy. But something like domestic violence. So we're sitting at the table and we're having all these discussions, and the moderator says, well, Sergeant Adams, we want to hear from you to answer this question. So when you deploy your men and women, what are your expectations on domestic calls? And I said, well, first I have to prepare you for my answers that, I'm here as Sergeant Adams, but Carol Adams is the human being here. And so until you know the story of Carol Adams, then will you understand Sergeant Adams? I said, my father murdered my mother when I was 17 years old. I called for the police during all of those years, and I did everything that I was supposed to. I said, but my mother still lost her life. Police officers responded, but there was nothing in place to dictate what they should do. And then it didn't, common sense didn't kick in to say, well, maybe we should, offer some services or something like that. And I said, so when my men and women go out to domestic violence calls, first of all, they know my story. So they know that they better get it right. They know that they better not re-victimize the family, and that they better provide everything that it is that they're wherewithal. And I'm coming to that call. They know that I'm coming. I say, so it's different for my men and women, but also for the Richmond Police Department, because God has afforded me the opportunity to walk amongst the people that are responding to these calls and to be one of them. First of all, to let them know it's okay to be human. We all have life experiences. I don't know what yours is, and I don't know what yours is, but we've all had them. We all have somebody who's been on drugs in our families, somebody that's been to jail in our families. All families are identical. They have identical. It does not matter where you come from, what country you live in, we're all the same. And so nothing should be that you're above. We're all at the same level because God made us all human. So that way I get to lead by example, to say what I mean and mean what I say. And when it comes down to my officers responding out, and that they're representing not just the Richmond Police Department, but Carol Adams. And if Carol Adams is an advocate for domestic violence and for helping families, then that's what we must do.
Out of curiosity, and I meant to ask this earlier, but you said you were 17 when you had to kind of take charge of your family, right? So how did you do that? What did you like? That just like at 17, I can't imagine. Like I'm kind of stupid now still. I can't imagine taking over a family right now in my life, and I'm 26. So what did you do? So did you have to drop out of school? Did you?
Nope. So at 7, I'll tell you, I was her oldest child, and she had me when she was 16. And oh my God, she was just so hard on me. She used to make me cook and clean, and my baby sister, she did whatever she wanted to do. But I was the oldest, so if it wasn't done, it's on me. So I had to do it, and everything I did, it had to be. My sister, I always had to care for her. She had to come with me everywhere, and I'm like a high school kid, a senior, getting ready to graduate. It's like, she shouldn't be going with me, this is my time. But she really ruled my life. And even to this, everything that I do it with her in mind, because I know that I have to represent her. And so, and I was the kind of child, I was like, what she said do, I did. And so it was no beating around the bush or slipping off to do this or to do that. So I already knew how to cook, to clean. I had my own job, buying my own things. And even though, I lived with them, but I was always independent. And so when this happened, we could have done two things. We could have moved to Emporia to live with my grandmother, but I was a senior in high school getting ready to graduate in June, so we wasn't having that. We could have moved here in the city with other relatives, but I decided that I didn't want to live with anybody else because my uncles were beating their wives too, so domestic violence was occurring throughout the family. And then also I said, well, God had stopped it for us. It was a volcano, right? The impact. But it had stopped. And so I knew how to pay bills. I knew how to be responsible. I went to the Department of Social Services, the Social Security office to apply for our Social Security benefits, which this happened in December. So in January, I went to the office and our benefits would come into effect in 6 months. So in 6 months, I would have been 18. So I would have been old enough to be the caretaker for my sister. And I didn't ask anybody. I just went and did it. My mom's severance package, I used that. I paid all of their bills. We had a trailer home in the country. I paid that off. My dad had a car and a van. All of that was taken care of. So when he came home, he still had everything he had before he went. I paid our monthly rent and our monthly utility bills. I graduated in June. My sister graduated the next June. When my dad came home, I moved because I still had to respect him as my father. And his issue with my mom was he didn't think I was his child, so I don't really know if he was my father or he wasn't my father, but I always grew up hearing that he wasn't my father or him saying that he wasn't my father. So I chose not to live with him anymore, but always took care of him because he died in 2002 from cancer. And so we took care of him, and we were right there by his side when he took his last breath. You continued to take care of him? Yeah, we took care of him and was there with him when he took his last breath, me and my sister and our children, and buried him and put him away, like children should. The Bible says, honor thy mother and thy father. And my grandmother told us that we couldn't hate him, that we had to allow God to fix what had been done, and that was between him and God. And I had to grow to the maturity to be mature enough to understand that it was better for her to be gone than to be still present, living in the same horror. And that's what I did. I paid the bills and took care of us. And that's what happened.
Jeez. Okay. We're going to move on. We're going to change topics a little bit. I don't know if I can do it anymore. Thanks for listening to part 1 of this conversation with Sergeant Carol Adams. Join us in our next episode as we continue the discussion talking about things like Black Lives Matter, police brutality, and we'll throw in some fun stuff in the bonus interview section. Speaking of which, I'm going to give you guys a portion of the bonus interview Sergeant Adams and I did, but first I wanted to thank a few people. I want to thank OJ Knight for helping me produce this episode, and I also wanted to thank my parents for their support and encouragement as I've been creating this podcast. I also want to thank Amanda Barnes for creating the image for Reaching Out, and I want to thank Jasmine Graves again for helping with the bonus interview section. Well, without further ado, let's get to some of the fun questions and finish out the podcast. Thanks for listening to Reaching Out with Zack Carter. What sport would be the funniest to add a mandatory amount of alcohol to?
Oh, wow. Soccer.
Soccer.
Yeah,
You think so? Yeah?
Yeah.
Why soccer?
They can't kick the ball. They kick the ball. They would fall down.
I think it would be hilarious if it was synchronized swimming and you added alcohol to it.
Yeah, that would be.
If your 5-year-old self suddenly found themselves inhabiting your current body, what would your 5-year-old self do first?
Draw more.
You would draw. You'd be drawing all the time. Yeah, you love to draw.
So yeah, I would paint. I would draw and paint more.
Yeah. I would just consume massive amounts of candy. I think that's what I would do.
And see, in painting, the painting and drawing sort of like it helped me. It was a survival mechanism.
Okay.
And so, my multitasking also is a survival mechanism because I have nervous energy, so I'm always doing things.
Okay.
And so, that is just been a part of my routine.
Just
But
like drawing?
Yeah, drawing.
Okay.
I used to draw everything, and I love to draw. I love to paint. I love to create, and I can pretty much build or make anything that I want.
Really?
With just whatever I have.
If animals could talk, which would be the rudest?
The rudest?
Yeah.
Probably a skunk.
You think a skunk?
Yeah.
Why a skunk?
Because
They already smell.
yeah, because you're walking around with that scent all day long. You think about it.
Yeah, totally. I think ostriches seem pompous. Like
Yeah, that's
already.
true.
I think
Yeah.
I think it would be the ostrich personally.
Yeah, but that skunk
Before I let you go, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and give it a review, as well as post it on social media. Please tell your friends about us. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks again for listening to Reaching Out with Zack Carter.